What does it mean for a weapon to be broken? This term is so overused right now, and everybody seems to have their own definition for it. These people all seem to have one thing in common, though. It seems like most of the people who say that a weapon is broken are people who don't main that weapon. And they have the perception that people who use the broken weapon have it easier than they do. I've seen it 100 times. People make the broken weapon claim about weapons they have little experience with. They have this fantasy that if only they started using the broken weapon, all of a sudden the game would be too easy and they just wouldn't have any fun playing. It's really, really weird. I'm not sure where this idea comes from, but I bet it has something to do with watching too many speedrun videos and thinking that speedruns are at all a reflection of the reality of the game, which they're not. I shouldn't have to remind you of that, but I will. Player skill levels vary so much from one person to the next, and people's perception of their own skill level varies so much. People's idea of what constitutes a good run or a broken run varies so much. So one man's broken weapon is another man's mid-tier weapon. In order to really determine if a weapon is broken, we have to define the term and then figure out how to measure how broken a weapon really is. So here's one definition that I propose. Broken means that there's a loophole in the game rules that allows someone to have a significant advantage beyond what the developers intended. Typically, when someone finds such an exploit, the game's creators or governing body changes the rules to close the loophole. We see this in professional sports all the time. We see it in player versus player fighting games. We see it in player versus environment games where somebody finds a way to dupe items or a glitch that allows them to bypass a defense multiplier, for example. In these cases, the intention of the game developers was in direct conflict with the way the game was actually working. So they changed the rules. Now, this makes sense for player versus player games where the goal is to give all players an equal playing field. You don't want to give an undue advantage to one team. But what does it mean for some aspect of a player versus environment game to be broken? You can't just look at win-loss percentages and decide that information doesn't exist. You can't even look at one player's performance versus another player's performance because in player versus environment games like Monster Hunter, we are not competing against each other. Now, if you look at my definition, something is broken if it allows someone to have a significant advantage beyond what the developers intended. Since we're not competing against other players, we have to measure this advantage in a different way. We're talking about broken weapons, so for a weapon to be broken, it must mean that a player has a significant advantage using that weapon instead of another one. That advantage would show up as lower quest clear times, maybe an easier time handling the weapon, maybe one weapon requires fewer button presses or less tactical thinking, or simply just a shorter time to learn the weapon to a level of competence. And yeah, there's no denying that some weapons are like this. Which weapon is easiest for you to learn depends largely on you as an individual. Your preferences, your prior experience, your capacity for developing advanced skill sets. Longsword in Monster Hunter Rise can be played competently using just 2 moves, Special Sheath and Yai Spirit Slash. You don't have to learn anything else to be successful. Your clear times will be average. Your controller's longevity will increase tenfold due to far fewer button presses. That doesn't mean that everyone can do this. Play online with a random sampling of longsword users and you'll see my point pretty quickly. So in many ways, playing longsword can give you certain significant advantages over playing, say, gunlance, but what about the second part of that definition, the part where it must violate the intentions of the developers? How could we tell what they meant the longsword to be? Let's take a look at how the developers balanced the weapons. I want to quote from this interview with the Capcom developers themselves. Quote, "On the dev side, one of the most important things that we strive to do in regards to the weapon balance is focusing heavily on developer test plays and being very meticulous in listing up the kinds of adjustments and kinds of changes that need to be made on the development side to each weapon. And to do this, we rely heavily on player statistics and data to make sure that any of the balances that we introduce don't kind of upset this balance, unquote. So not only do the Capcom developers do extensive testing, but what's more important here is that they rely on how you are experiencing the game. See where it says player statistics and data? Yeah. Capcom knows more about how good you are at this game than you know about yourself. They know all your clear times, your quest failures, your weapon choices, how often you use a particular move or combo. They know when you're mashing buttons. They know when you abandon a quest. So if people are clearing quests significantly faster with Longsword than what the developers intended, Capcom knows about it. The game sends all that info to the devs and they decide, based on actual data, whether or not the weapon is functioning the way they want it to. And I believe that they do intend Longsword to be easier to use for beginners. I also believe that they intend for it to work really well in the hands of an expert. So if you're going to claim that a weapon is broken, you'll have to provide something more than a vague feeling or generalization or a mediocre clear time to demonstrate it. If you really think that people are clearing quests broken percentages faster with Longsword, then demonstrate it. I have an idea. Show us your guild card with 500 plus uses of your main weapon and less than 10 uses of Longsword. And then show us how you can beat multiple difficult quests faster with Longsword than with your main weapon. That, I think, is a level of proof it would require to demonstrate that Longsword gives you an advantage beyond what the developers intended. I don't think you'll be able to do it. I think you'll have to put in the time to learn the weapon and learn the monsters using that weapon. Once your skill level with Longsword is approximately equal to your skill level with your main weapon, I think only then will you see faster clear times with Longsword. And that's okay. That isn't broken, that's how the game is designed. Some weapons are gonna be easier to learn and use. Take Hunting Horn for example. I've barely used this weapon, but a quick internet search showed me the basics. I learned what set to build, how to ramp up my horn. I learned which moves and combos have the highest payoff. I learned where the iframes were at. All this information is easy to find, freely available. A few minutes in the training area, and I was ready to go out and suck hard with the Hunting Horn. And suck hard I did. Look at this. I mean, just look at this. I dare you to compliment me on my playing. I double dog dare you. This video is an embarrassment, but I'm suffering through that in order to prove a point. Hunting Horn has a move with ridiculous iframes. It also has a move that can do damage approaching 1000. I don't even use that move as often as I should here. And clearly, I don't have the iframes down either. Are you counting how many potions I'm drinking? Look, I even carded once. I spent all that time going into the tent and then running back to the monster. Despite all this nonsense gameplay that you've been watching, I still beat Rurikhan's time, using a weapon that I know very little about against a monster that is incredibly annoying and hits like a truck. So that must mean that the Hunting Horn is completely broken too, right? Funny because most people put the Hunting Horn in the lowest tier of weapons in the entire game. Or maybe Hunting Horn isn't broken. Maybe it's just that with a bit of preparation and a lot of luck, you can clear most quests with most weapons in a reasonable amount of time. But that's not really true either, is it? Because a lot of you still struggle to clear the harder quests in under 20 minutes, whether you're using a longsword or a hunting horn or even a bow. I know this is true because I've been there. I was like you once, so was Rurikhan. When I was just starting out, I had to switch weapons based on what was best for the quest, based on what would help me survive and do enough damage. There were times when I'd take a lance and poke at a Latrion from behind my shield because that was the only way I would survive. 500 hours later, I was clearing that Latrion quest in 2 minutes using a bowgun. Now, thousands of hours later, I use whatever weapon I want to have fun with because I can, and I don't worry so much about which tool is the best one. It's okay if you're only 100 hours into the game and you aren't a gun lance expert. It's okay if using sticky heavy bowgun is the safest way for you to take out Rajang. We all come at this game with different experiences and different skill sets. The game is designed to give you a lot of tools to choose from. It's designed so that if you're not yet an expert with the weapon you really have a lot of fun with, there's always one there to get you through a tough situation. One that's easy enough to pick up and learn just enough to get you past that wall. For some people, that weapon's longsword. For others, light bowgun. For me, I don't know. This hunting horn is growing on me. If I'd known the emergency quest would be this easy with it, I would have mained hunting horn right from the start over a year ago and never looked back. What are they doing out there? Landing a fucking airplane?
Suo imiクラムウテラ